He thought he had inherited the perfect family home. But when he discovered a sealed room in his attic and hired someone to help him open it, he realized it was the worst mistake of his life. Subscribe and write where you're watching this video from. David Chun had never imagined he would inherit his great-uncle's Victorian mansion. For more than a decade, he had endured the endless meetings, the fluorescent-lit corridors, and the cramped office that reeked of microwaved lunches and desperation. Day after day, he had taken the same elevator to the same floor, stared at the same computer screen, and returned each night to an apartment where the neighbors' arguments seeped through paper-thin walls. The exhaustion had carved itself into his bones, aging him before his time, and he often wondered if this hollow routine was all life would ever offer him. But after his great-uncle's sudden passing, something fundamental shifted within him. The old man had worked tirelessly until his final day, hoarding every penny and sacrificing every pleasure, only to leave this world in the same dusty house where he had lived as a recluse for 40 years. That realization shook David to his core. He liquidated his modest savings, resigned from his position, and moved into the sprawling 3-story house that now belonged to him. The Victorian mansion had appeared almost too good to be true. A grand structure with ornate woodwork, stained glass windows, and original hardwood floors that creaked with history. The property had been in the family for generations, complete with a wraparound porch, elaborate crown molding, and a tower room that offered views of the entire neighborhood. David convinced himself not to question this stroke of fortune. Perhaps it was simply meant to be. He signed the final paperwork and soon found himself standing in the marble-floored foyer of his new home, inhaling the scent of old wood and forgotten memories. The air felt heavy here, weighted with decades of solitude, and each breath seemed to carry whispers of the past. Initially, the house felt foreign and overwhelming. The floorboards groaned under his weight in certain rooms. The windows rattled with every gust of autumn wind, and sometimes the walls themselves seemed to sigh as they settled in the cool evenings. But David found these imperfections charming. He arranged his few belongings throughout the vast rooms, unpacked boxes of books, hung photographs of his parents, and positioned his great-uncle's antique grandfather clock in the main hallway. Each day brought new discoveries about his inheritance. The hidden servants' bells still mounted in the kitchen, the original gaslights converted to electricity decades ago, and the way afternoon sunlight painted rainbows through the stained glass landing window. He spent hours exploring room after room, marveling at the craftsmanship of a bygone era, a connection to history he had never experienced while hurrying through modern office buildings. The neighbors were polite when he introduced himself, though he detected something guarded in their expressions whenever he mentioned living alone in the old Chin house. It was subtle, a momentary hesitation, a flicker of concern in their eyes, but David did not press for details. They received him with reserved friendliness, the new owner of a house that had been shuttered for months. An elderly woman from across the street, her hands weathered from decades of gardening, made an offhand comment that lingered in David's thoughts longer than it should have. "That old house of yours," she muttered while tending her roses. "Your uncle kept to himself for a reason. Some families have secrets better left alone," she added with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather. Yet her stare was penetrating, as if gauging David's response. David chuckled politely, dismissing it as neighborhood gossip, the kind of tales that small communities preserve about their more eccentric residents. But when he returned home that evening, the remark echoed in his mind. He stood in his front hall, gazing up the grand staircase toward the upper floors he had not yet fully explored. The air grew chillier as darkness fell, and for a moment he wondered if there truly was something about his inherited home that warranted caution. It was 5 weeks later, while organizing boxes in the third-floor attic space, that David made the discovery. As he moved storage containers and old furniture away from the far wall, he noticed an irregularity in the wooden paneling. The boards in that section were different, darker, and when he looked closely, he could see they had been added much later than the original construction. His pulse quickened as he ran his hands along the seams, feeling for any mechanism or opening. There was definitely something behind this wall, but it had been sealed deliberately and completely. The revelation both thrilled and unsettled him. He tapped on the wood and heard the hollow echo of empty space beyond. The craftsmanship was crude compared to the rest of the house, as if someone had hastily walled off this section and tried to make it blend with the surrounding paneling. The work was functional but obvious once you knew where to look. David spent the rest of the evening pacing the attic, his mind racing with possibilities. Perhaps it was additional storage space. Maybe his great-uncle had sealed off a damaged section of roof or blocked access to unsafe structural elements. The idea of hidden history within his own walls was intoxicating. There was something compelling about discovering what previous generations had chosen to conceal. Yet beneath his excitement lurked a thread of unease. If this was merely unused space, why had it been sealed so thoroughly, blocked as if meant to be forgotten forever? That night, sleep proved elusive. He lay in bed, listening to the house's natural sounds, the creaking of old timber, the whisper of wind through loose shingles, the steady ticking of his great-uncle's clock in the hallway. Each time he closed his eyes, he envisioned the sealed wall in the attic, the mysterious space that lay just beyond those hastily installed boards. The image refused to fade, hovering in his thoughts like a shadow just beyond comprehension. He shifted restlessly, pressing his face into the pillow, and told himself that it was nothing more than natural curiosity about his inherited home. Yet deep down, beneath rational thought, a question persisted, echoing softly like distant thunder. What lay behind those carefully hidden boards? Though he would not admit it to himself, David knew his peaceful family mansion had just become something far more complex. The following morning, David rose before dawn, his mind already consumed by thoughts of what he had discovered. He brewed coffee and sat in the breakfast nook, staring through the window at the tree-lined street while the sealed attic room dominated his thoughts. No matter how he tried to rationalize it as simple storage or forgotten space, curiosity gnawed at him with relentless persistence. He knew that if he didn't investigate, the image of that concealed wall would haunt every quiet moment in his new home. But as morning progressed into afternoon, David found himself hesitating. Each time he climbed to the third floor, each time he considered attempting to breach the sealed wall, something held him back. His hands would tremble slightly, his chest would tighten, and he would find reasons to busy himself with other tasks. He organized his great-uncle's belongings, researched the house's history, and even took long walks through the neighborhood, but the hidden room pulled at his thoughts like a magnet. By evening, he had reached a decision that surprised even himself. He would hire someone else to open it. The realization came with a mixture of relief and embarrassment. He, a grown man who had summoned the courage to abandon his entire corporate career, was too anxious to break through a wall in his own home. But the feeling persisted nonetheless, a deep reluctance that seemed to emanate from some primal instinct warning him away. The next morning, David looked up local contractors and found Jake Morrison, a renovation specialist whose website showcased before and after photos of Victorian restorations. Jake was a lean man in his 40s, with steady hands and the careful demeanor of someone who understood old houses. When David explained that he needed help accessing what appeared to be a sealed room in his attic, Jake's expression grew thoughtful. "Sealed room, you say?" Jake rubbed his chin thoughtfully. These old Victorians sometimes had spaces closed off for structural reasons, or maybe your uncle just wanted extra insulation. Makes sense, I suppose. But there was something in his tone, a slight hesitation that made David wonder if Jake knew more about the house's history than he was saying. Still, the contractor agreed to come out the following afternoon, and David felt a wave of relief wash over him. The day of Jake's visit passed slowly. David found himself pacing the house, straightening things that didn't need straightening, checking the time every few minutes. When Jake's van finally pulled up to the curb, David met him on the front porch with an eagerness that bordered on desperation. "So where's this mysterious room?" Jake asked, shouldering his tool bag as they entered the house. David led him up the narrow servant's stairs to the third floor and pointed to the sealed wall in the attic. Jake knelt and examined the paneling with the practiced eye of someone who understood construction and renovation. He traced the seams with his finger, tapped on different sections to test the sound, then looked up at David with a curious expression. "This is recent work," he said. "Probably done in the last 20 or 30 years. Question is, why seal off perfectly good space like this?" The same question that had been plaguing David, but coming from Jake's lips, it sounded even more ominous. Together, they moved the remaining storage items away from the wall, fully exposing the sealed section. Jake retrieved a reciprocating saw from his bag and began carefully cutting through the boards. The wood was thick, and it took several minutes of methodical work before they had created an opening large enough to see through. "There we go," Jake muttered, but his voice lacked enthusiasm. He retrieved a powerful flashlight from his toolbox and aimed the beam through the gap. What they saw took both men's breath away. Beyond the wall was not additional attic space, but a fully furnished room that had been perfectly preserved. Cool air rushed out from the opening, carrying with it the scent of old fabric and dust that had been trapped for decades. The flashlight beam revealed antique furniture covered in white sheets, stacks of books, and personal belongings arranged as if someone had simply stepped away and never returned. Jake whistled low under his breath. "Well, I'll be damned. This is like a time capsule." He widened the opening enough for them to step through. "Looks like someone's private study or something." David's heart hammered in his chest. This was far more than he had bargained for. The sealed wall had been mysterious enough, but this was an entire hidden world within his own home. He found himself both terrified and fascinated, unable to look away from the preserved room that had been concealed for so long. "Should we?" he began, then stopped. The truth was, part of him didn't want to enter that space. Every instinct screamed at him to seal the wall back up and pretend he had never found it. But Jake, apparently untroubled by such hesitations, was already stepping through the opening. "Might as well see what we're dealing with," Jake said, his flashlight beam dancing across the hidden room. "Could be valuable antiques, family documents, who knows what." His light illuminated more details as he moved deeper into the space, leaving David alone in the familiar attic. For several minutes, David heard only the sound of Jake moving carefully through the hidden room, the creak of floorboards and rustle of fabric. Then, suddenly, the sound stopped. The silence stretched long enough that David began to worry. "Jake," he called through the opening. "Everything okay in there?" Jake's voice drifted back from the depths of the room, but there was something different about it now, a tension that hadn't been there before. "David, you need to see this. There's something here that doesn't make sense." Against every instinct that warned him to stay away, David squeezed through the opening into the hidden room. The space was larger than it had appeared from outside, running the entire width of the house. Sheets covered most of the furniture, but in the dim light he could make out the shapes of chairs, a desk, and tall bookcases lining the walls. The air was stale but not unpleasant, heavy with the scent of old paper and preserved fabric. Jake had stopped near the far end of the room, his flashlight trained on something David couldn't yet see. As David approached, he realized why the contractor had called for him. The desk at the end of the room wasn't covered, and scattered across its surface were dozens of photographs, all showing the same person at different ages. A young woman with dark hair and sad eyes, captured in images that spanned what looked like decades. "Look at this," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. He aimed his flashlight at the wall above the desk, where hundreds more photographs had been carefully mounted and arranged. All the same woman, from childhood through what appeared to be middle age. Some were candid shots taken from a distance. Others looked like they had been clipped from newspapers or magazines. David swept his own light across the space, revealing more details that made his stomach tighten. The walls were covered not just with photographs, but with newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, and what appeared to be a detailed timeline marked with dates and locations. Maps with routes highlighted in red ink. Pages and pages of cramped handwriting that filled journals stacked on every available surface. "What do you think this was?" David asked, though he dreaded the answer. Jake examined some of the newspaper clippings, his expression growing more disturbed by the minute. "This looks like, God, I hate to say it, but this looks like someone was stalking this woman. For years, maybe decades." He gestured at the timeline on the wall. "Look at all these dates and locations. Someone was tracking her every move." As they moved deeper into the room, Jake's flashlight caught something that made both men freeze. Pinned to a corkboard near the desk was what appeared to be a driver's license photo, along with copies of official documents bearing the woman's name, Margaret Sullivan. Below it, in careful handwriting, someone had written detailed personal information, addresses, phone numbers, and what looked like daily schedules. "Jesus," Jake breathed. Your great-uncle was documenting everything about this woman's life. But it was what they found in the desk drawers that truly shattered David's peace of mind. Hidden beneath layers of more photographs and documents were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to Margaret Sullivan but never sent. David held one carefully in the beam of his flashlight, and what he read made his blood run cold. The letters were love letters, but they were filled with obsession and delusion. His great-uncle had written them over a period of years, describing imaginary conversations and relationships that clearly existed only in his mind. Some were gentle and romantic. Others were angry and accusatory, as if Margaret had somehow betrayed him despite the fact that she obviously had no idea he existed. The words seemed to reverberate through the hidden room long after David had read them aloud. Jake stepped back, his face pale in the artificial light. "We should leave," he said quietly. "Right now." But David was already opening another drawer, drawn by a compulsion he couldn't explain. His light revealed more disturbing evidence of his great-uncle's obsession. Detailed floor plans of what must have been Margaret's home, sketches of her daily routines, and even what appeared to be attempts at poetry dedicated to her. And there, in the deepest drawer, was a collection of personal items that could only have been stolen: a scarf, jewelry, and other small belongings that bore her initials. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't just an obsession documented from afar. His great-uncle had been actively stalking this woman, breaking into her life, taking pieces of it back to this hidden shrine he had built in his own home. The photographs, the stolen items, the obsessive documentation, they all told the same horrific story. "David." Jake's voice was urgent now. "We're leaving. Now." They squeezed back through the opening in silence, their flashlight beams dancing wildly with their hurried movements. When they emerged into the familiar attic, the ordinary storage space felt almost surreal after the horror they had discovered behind the wall. Jake immediately began gathering his tools, his hands shaking slightly. "I'm going to pretend I never saw that," he said, avoiding David's eyes. "And if you're smart, you'll seal that thing back up and call the police." But even as Jake spoke the words, David knew it was too late. The knowledge of what his great-uncle had been, what this house had concealed, had already taken hold of him, burrowing into his thoughts like a parasite. The photographs of Margaret Sullivan, the evidence of years of stalking, the shrine dedicated to a woman who had no idea she was being watched, they were seared into his memory now, impossible to forget. Jake left without another word, his van disappearing down the tree-lined street with unseemly haste. David stood alone in his attic, staring at the opening they had cut in the wall, and felt the weight of his terrible discovery settling around him like a shroud. That night, the sounds began, soft at first, barely audible above the normal settling of the old house. A rhythmic creaking that seemed to emanate from the third floor, from the direction of the hidden room. David told himself it was just old wood expanding and contracting, anything but what his terrified mind suggested. But as the hours passed, the creaking grew more deliberate, more insistent, until it sounded almost like someone moving around up there, walking through the preserved shrine. He had wanted a peaceful family home, but instead he had inherited a nightmare that would never let him rest. The hole in the attic wall gaped like a wound in his ceiling, and no matter how he tried to ignore it, he could feel the presence of that hidden room above, pressing downward into his sanctuary with the weight of its dark secrets. David realized then that his neighbor had been right about one thing: some family secrets were better left alone. But it was too late for such wisdom now. He had hired someone else to open the wall because he lacked the courage to do it himself, but courage had nothing to do with it. Some doors, once opened, could never be closed again. And as he lay sleepless in his bed, listening to the sounds from above and wondering what other secrets his inherited home might hold, David understood that he had traded one kind of prison for another. The corporate world had trapped his body, but this place had claimed something far worse. It had claimed his peace of mind, and perhaps, if the obsessive documentation upstairs was to be believed, it had made him complicit in something even more sinister than that. The creaking continued through the night, patient and persistent, like something that had been waiting a very long time for someone to finally discover it. And David, despite every rational thought that told him otherwise, couldn't shake the growing certainty that whatever his great-uncle had been doing in that hidden room was far from over. If this story shocked you, just wait until you see what's coming next. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell so you never miss our most unbelievable discoveries. Don't stop here. Check out the other videos on our channel right now, each one more jaw-dropping than the last. And if you know someone who loves a mystery as much as you do, share this video with them. They won't believe what happens next.